Welcome back to Spotlight ETSU. Thanks for joining us after the break. We still have with us Brandon Johnson and Sydney Crowder. So first off, I want to just, with this new segment, I want to kind of take a shift here. Maybe talk a little bit about stuff on the national level. So one of the big things nowadays that people complain about all the time, and I'm sure they've been actually complaining about it since the dawn of the political party system, is party division. Now, Marco Rubio recently dropped out of the race, so that leaves mainly just Donald Trump and Cruz. And with the Democrats, of course, we've had mostly just Clinton and Bernie the entire time, it seems. So with that, you have a lot of different ideas, even within the particular party. So how do you think that you can manage to kind of get over this culture of party division, even within the party? It's been a talking point among many Republican candidates that they're a maverick, that they're always against the established Republican committee. I think Cruz very heavily plays that point. So how would you say you can work to overcome that within the party? At the end of the day, a lot of the party members tend to rally around one candidate,
for sure,
and you don't have to worry about it as much. But there's still a lot of division even within the parties. How do you think you would overcome that?
I think it's really interesting. You mentioned establishment, right? And I was scrolling through my social media this morning, and I saw a thing, and this lady said, "I don't believe in restriction of free speech." But jokingly, she said, "I think if you say the word establishment, you should have to have a 3-sentence definition of what establishment is," right? And it's this kind of code that we use to basically say, oh, we don't agree with them, therefore they are establishment, right? And so it's just kind of this nifty little thing we throw out there. But
so it's a buzzword, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But kind of like you were saying, we've seen a real interesting thing in both the Democrat and Republican parties. And I'll kind of talk about our party. We have seen a very different party division going on between the rise of Donald Trump and the rise of folks like Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, John Kasich, and some other folks that are your more traditional conservatives. And what's really interesting, and I think, is a difference in belief. I am a Republican because I'm a conservative. I am not a conservative because I'm a Republican. And that's a very, very defined difference.
And at the end of the day, I guess that's kind of what matters, right?
Yeah, definitely. And personally, I would rather see the party shift or this rip or something like that than ever compromise my values. So I personally will never vote for a candidate that compromises any of my values. And so I think we're going to see a whole lot of that heading into the Republican National Convention in Ohio, really looking if Donald Trump keeps up this winning spree, if he's able to capture that magic number, and what happens from there.
Okay. What about the Democratic Party, where in this case you have a real shift, or you have a real contrast of older voters particularly preferring Clinton and the younger voters preferring Bernie Sanders? So how would you say that as a group you can overcome that over time to kind of lessen this radical division even within the party itself?
Well, the division within the party, it really needs to be unified by really putting aside the age differences. Yes, there are a lot of older Democrats that are voting for Clinton. Yes, there are a lot of younger Democrats who are voting for Bernie. But also know that there are fewer Democrats that are young that are voting for Clinton and fewer Democrats that are older that are voting for Bernie. By putting aside the fact that you have such a vast age gap between the two of you, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter how long you've been in the party. It shouldn't matter if you just joined the Democratic Party because, look, Bernie Sanders is running. You really need to solidify and find out where you stand. Like, what is important to you? And only then can you really say, okay, this is why I'm in this party. So by helping people identify why they're here and finding that little sect of the Democratic Party, and by showing what those sects have in common, that's the only way you can unify. So by doing that, and by showing that we are all here for the same goal, we are all here to make sure the nation gets better, to make sure that things are improved, to make sure that we have safety across the board, and have compromise across the board, and have this real sense of like community. Mm-hmm. That's what's important. That's what we're leading towards, and that's why it's important.
What would you then say to people who claim that they won't vote at all if, say a Bernie Sanders supporter says, oh, I won't vote if Clinton gets elected, or vice versa? What would you say to that then? Because that's, a good example of the issue of even within the party being divided. And so they can be part of the party because they have those things in common and recognize that, but some of them say they still won't vote, and it's the same thing on the other side, of course. But in this particular case, what would you say to something like that?
If you don't vote in the general election, then if you're a Democrat and you're a staunch Democrat, and that's like how you identify, it's a vote for a Republican. That's fine. That's dandy. I love Brandon Johnson with all my heart and soul, but that's what it is. It's what it comes down to. If you don't want Trump or Cruz or Kasich or sadly Rubio, who has dropped out now, to win, then you have to vote. You have to show that this is what you want. You have to throw your support behind somebody, even if it's a third party, even if you don't really completely and totally agree with whoever our front runner is, be it Hillary, be it Bernie. That's what's really important. You have to get out there and vote, because voting is the most important thing you can do. That's how your voice is heard. And just because you think that your one vote doesn't count, 2/3 of the population don't vote, and that counts a lot.
Okay. So then how would you say you would reconcile your own personal preferences if a candidate is chosen that you don't particularly care for? So, if you're a senator supporter and Clinton gets chosen, how do you reconcile your own personal opinion saying, well, I really don't like Clinton, but you still don't want to not vote? So how do you personally, and how would you tell other people to reconcile that kind of disagreement, even though the person that they want didn't get elected, or in the case of Brandon here, Rubio being dropped out, who I believe was your personal preference?
It was.
So what would you do in that case, or how would you what would you say to people for that?
Well, I'm very, very, very much a Hillary supporter. I love her to death. I think she's going to be great for the country. But I've looked at Bernie, I've looked at his policies and what he really wants to do with the country and what he really wants to do later on in life, and I've seen his voting record in the past. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with, but there's also a lot of things that I do, and that's kind of how I reconcile it. It's how I work it out in my own mind. Is no, I don't agree that college should be tuition free, but I don't oppose that. I believe that it should be debt free. I don't believe I should go billions of dollars into debt because I want to go to school. I don't agree with that, but I feel like by pushing towards that, by looking at who he is and what he really wants to do and how that really lines up with my own personal views, I think that's the only way we can really reconcile.
What about you personally? And speaking to people that are members of the Republican Party?
Yeah, for sure. Time and time again, I personally would never ask someone to vote for someone in the election that would compromise their values. So I would really ask them to sit down, to really think about what values they hold dearest, to really pray about it and try to find a candidate that aligns with their values. But no matter what, I don't think anyone should ever compromise their integrity.
Okay. Would you say, though, having to reconcile sort of these differences or these opinions, when somebody that's is chosen you don't agree with, say we don't really have an extreme party to speak of like a multi-party nation might have, so that example doesn't really fly. But in the case of Republican Party, how would you reconcile that if the person that's chosen just doesn't line up with your opinions? Maybe one or two here, but overall it doesn't.
I don't know if a reconciliation's the correct thing. I mean, when you are talking about politics, it's easy to talk about compromise on bills or legislation, but when you're talking about who is going to be the leader of our country, I don't think there should be that much compromise. You have to stand firm in what you believe and why you believe it and what God intended you to do, and that's the reason why you vote, right? That you stand behind a person not who you believe could win or could beat this person, but who you actually believe in, who you want to see steer the country. And while I agree that it may be easy for supporters of Senator Rubio to kind of rally behind Senator Cruz or Governor Kasich, it's going to be a lot harder to see how the Republican Party moves forward. And if Mr. Trump is our nominee, tries to bring some of those voters to this more progressive Republican Party that we see Mr. Trump leading.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to actually kind of change gears, because recently we just found out that Obama nominated a Supreme Court member candidate. So when we talked about that just briefly before shooting the episode, you mentioned that the Republican Party plans to block any nomination set forth by Obama. So I'd really like to hear why you would do that, or what your plan is regarding that, how you think that might be a benefit overall.
Yeah, for sure. It is very, 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 very rare for a president that is leaving his second term of office this late in his presidency to appoint someone and have them confirmed. You kind of hear different year figures, but it hasn't been done in something like 60, 70 years. And what's really interesting is we saw our friends on the left back when we had President Bush, kind of the same thing happen, and we saw Vice President Biden, we saw President Obama, and some other, Chuck Schumer, saying, hey, we cannot appoint someone. We need to wait until we elect a new president. So it's kind of funny when the shoe's on the other foot, how the song changes a little bit. But I think we have a duty to wait. There's a reason that the president appoints and the Senate confirms, and I'm very proud that we have a Senate majority in a Republican majority in control of the Senate. However, we just did appoint an Obama nominee to Secretary of Education, so it's very obvious that the Republicans are willing to compromise. However, with something as important as the Supreme Court of the United States.
Well, you bring up, though, that Obama and Biden himself both voted against it and saying we should wait, and that's what you guys are planning on doing now. But doesn't that sound like it's kind of just getting back, a little bit vengeful? That doesn't sound like it's necessarily in the greater interest, but instead just kind of, you know, ha-ha, sucks, doesn't it?
No, I don't think that at all. I think that when they did that back in, I mean, it's kind of this constant flip-flop, right? I mean, you have one presidential or one party in control of a president, and then another party control of the legislative body, right? We've seen that time and time again. And when they are different parties, we see, just like we saw in Bush's presidency and just like we see in President Obama's, that the other party is urging them to wait. They say, wait, we are so close to the end of your term, let's wait until November, let's see what the American public want, and then appoint a candidate thereafter. I don't think it's vengeful at all.
Okay. So what would be your take on that issue then?
My take is that, per Constitution, the president is supposed to nominate. Whether or not the Republicans choose to block that is their choice. That is up to them. That is why we have the Senate confirmation. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. It's perfectly all right. But I think that because this candidate is a moderate, because he doesn't align on neither the left nor the right, he's very, very centralized. I think that that's cause for pause. I think that's why we need to look at this in a thorough manner, not just maybe perhaps because of vengefulness or because you feel like we should wait, whatever the reason be. I think that we really need to look at what's going to be important in this nation, because I know a lot of important docket cases are coming up, and that's what we need to focus on.
All right. Well, actually, I have to apologize because we have to wrap it up now. Thank you for joining us, though. This has been Spotlight ETSU with Brandon Johnson and Sydney Crowder. I appreciate you guys coming up here. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Go Bucks.